that's what it comes down to, is how do you create that flowing motion, whether it's a baseball pitcher, whether it's a high jumper, whatever it is. And that you don't learn that in school.
That was Vern Gambetta, and you're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast. If there's one thing that has completely changed my approach to supplementation, it's been finding performance herbalism. Herbalism is different than your typical supplements, particularly because herbalism works by harnessing the power of nature. It involves using tried and tested, high-grade, well-sourced herbal compounds to make a difference in your energy, strength, boost your hormonal system, and improve your overall vitality. That's what today's sponsor, Lost Empire Herbs, can bring to you. Whether it's through Shilajit resin, which has been highly recommended by many coaches for improved strength, mushroom tinctures for immune support, combination packages such as the Phoenix formula, which is one of my favorites, Lost Empire Herbs has the supplements that will help you in achieving your performance training goals. If you want to check out Performance Herbalism for free to see what they can do for you and only have to pay a modest cost of shipping, you can get pine pollen, one of their flagship products, for free. It's a key ingredient in the Phoenix formula. And to get that free bag of pine pollen sent to your door for only the normal cost of shipping, you can head to justflypinepollen.com. That's justflypinepollen.com. Lost Empire Herbs is a great company, and I hope you get a chance to check them out. Welcome to another episode of the podcast, and thanks for tuning in. I am so excited to welcome to the show Vern Gambetta today. Vern is a coaching legend. He has over 50 years of experience in the field. He is the director of Gambetta Sports Training Systems. And you're not going to find too many coaches out there who have the experience, who have read the number of books and coaching literature, and also have the stories, the anecdotes, and just the understanding of the broader coaching and performance training tree that Vern does. On the show today, Vern will be talking about training that fits the needs of the athlete. We'll be going into a discussion on different forms of lifting, Olympic weightlifting, but also those elements of training that deal with movement quality, flow, rhythm, tempo, things that help athletes to move well and to do so throughout their careers. Vern also gets into creativity and the creative art form of coaching. This and much more on the episode today. It was awesome talking to Vern, and I'm excited to get this show going. So let's get to episode 391 here with Coach Vern Gambetta. So you were originally like football, and I'm sure growing up when you did, you went and played all the games in the neighborhood and had kind of more of that rich, typical free play youth, and then football, and then track. Tell me a little bit about that, how start whenever you want in that timeline of things, but I'm really curious how that unfolded.
In high school, I didn't even start until I was a senior in football, but I don't know why I wanted to be a college football player. My brother was a great athlete, and he was a really good football player that never everything came easy. I was the opposite. I was a decent basketball player, and I could jump. And then in track, I threw the shot not well, and I ran the 100. I realized quickly in my senior year that, and I started lifting weights before my senior year in high school, the summer of 1963, spring of 1963. And I was told that you're going to get tight, and all of a sudden, instead of just touching the rim, I've got my hand over the rim. I'm flexed. I got a hold of some really good 3 books. There's only 3 books at that time. My quarterback on the team and I tried to organize. Nobody else would lift, and so we'd lift in my garage. I bought a York 6-foot barbell and 135 pounds of weight, which was more than sufficient at that time. And I got up to 177, and I love track. There was a meet in Santa Barbara called the Santa Barbara Easter Relays. There was always, it was like the spring meet for all they weren't called D1 schools. They're UCLA, SC, University of Washington, Cal, Stanford, all came. And just to go there and see these great athletes. And so that ignited my curiosity. What are they doing? You saw big people, in the sprints that were bigger than I running, really fast. And so, it ignited my curiosity. And then in college at Fresno State, I was a lineman, an offensive lineman. And in those days, you could play. So my sophomore year, I got up to 220, and then the new coach came in and he wanted us lighter. And so I got down to 200. And then when I finally played well, I graded out as a top lineman in spring practice in going into my senior year. I was a 193-pound offensive guard. I asked to switch to guard because I then and I was probably the sixth or seventh. I was definitely the fastest lineman and as fast as some of our running backs, which says a lot. We were good, but I could run like a 4.7. They didn't measure 40s, but it was probably 4.7, 4.6 in that range. So I knew that speed at playing guard with speed would help me. But what helped me as soon as freshman football was over, there was a guy in a near jump coach, Charlie Craig, who was a great triple jumper, and he was the collegiate record holder at that time, was still going to school there, and he was in the weight room. And we only had universal gyms, and there was 440 pounds on the leg press, and he'd have me stand on the leg press, and he could one-legged leg press almost 600 pounds. So I go back to the dorm, and my head is spinning like, and he's a great guy, and he's a great coach at Cal State Bakersfield and assistant at Cal for a while. And and then I started, and so the next year in the off season, I trained with the track guys, and especially at first it was the throwers, but then with the jumpers, right? Sprinters didn't lift then, and so that opened a whole new world to me. And then there was a high jumper there named Larry Alexander, who was a teammate of help me, just Rick Sloan. No, no, let me make sure I got this right. Yes, he was. I think he was a teammate of Rick Sloan's. No, he wasn't. He was friends with Rick Sloan, and Rick Sloan went to Fulton Junior College, which was a great track school, and Larry went to Pasadena City College. He transferred to Fresno State, and he looked like Valerie Brumel. I mean, he gave me all his track techniques. So instead of studying, I'd read track techniques, and so I started going, wait a minute, now some of this stuff that I'm doing doesn't make sense relative to what I have to do, right? And and so I looked at Brumel's training and all of that. So I think I know that started I don't know if it's an odyssey, a journey, whatever. And that's why somebody asked me, I think I said this to you the other day, somebody asked me down in Australia, it might have been Eddie Jones, how have you worked with all these different sports? And I said, because of run, jump, and throw, because, track and field is run, jump, and throw. I was infatuated with the decathlon. In 1960, I'm still trying to, there was no videotape of programs in, so it was gone. There was a terrific special on KTLA Channel 5 with Rayford Johnson and C.K. Yang. They were teammates at UCLA, and this was leading into the 60 Olympics. And Ducky Drake, who the stadium is named after, who was also the head trainer, was the head track coach. And it was an hour-long special. And I go, I want to do that. Now, remember, I was a guard in football, and at that time I was 5'2", 110 pounds. But so I had just not very much of a scholarship, but I couldn't take a chance because spring practice was 6 weeks long when I was in college. And we had a couple of pretty good, John Warkentine was a really good decathlete, there at Fresno State. And I'd watch him train. I mean, he'd be training all the time. So my senior year, I took theory of track and field, and we had to do all events, and you have to show proficiency. And Red Estes was the assistant coach, later head coach. And he said, well, if you want, I said, I want to coach track. I didn't have a great experience in football. He said, well, do decathlon. And that shows how naive I was. So when I went back to Santa Barbara, I went out to Sam Adams at UCSB, and there was athletes training there. And that's where the Magical Mystery Tour started. So, and the other key thing was that January, they had their first track and field clinic at Fresno State, 1968. And the speakers were, and this was Bill Bowerman. And I left that Friday night and I said, I want to be like that guy. I loved his approach. And then the other guy was Ken Shannon. Ken Shannon was the field events coach at UCLA at the time. And he had Rick Sloan. I mean, he had Rick Sloan who made the decathlon in 1968. But Shannon was a great throws coach, but he was a great field event coach, part of the coaching tree out of Occidental College. So I could go on, but those are the things that really ignited my passion. I saw how these Bowerman was passionate, Shannon was passionate, the coaches at Fresno State. I watched a little guy named Daryl Newman who beat Bob Hayes indoors. He's a little short, I mean the carrot, but little short white guy from the Valley, bald headed. They call him the bald bullet. 100 meters was about 1 meters too long for him. And I watched him train, and he couldn't run in training. They ran this grass 150s, and all the other guys were running six. Charlie and those guys, Sam Workman, he could run three and he'd puke. That was it. Well, I realized now he was a drop dead sprinter, and I thought, well, he's not, what if he really got in shape? I couldn't equated it with getting in shape, but that wasn't what it was, and so anyway, enough said.
Yeah,
You get
no,
an idea of the background. It was a magic time to really be exposed to track and field, 1968 to 72, and it was really a magic time in the sport.
Yeah. It is interesting I think most people and coaches' experience of athletic performance or track and field, it's very much what you see. A lot of it's short form, what you see on social media, YouTube training.
Yeah.
And we were just talking a little bit before we pushed record about the training literature and the books from the 70s and the 80s. And some of the things early 90s, even a few that I've picked up there, I really like. And it was Dan John who had mentioned the Triple Jump Encyclopedia. So of course I go buy it right away. And it is interesting to think too, like your training philosophy being so influenced by that golden age. And sometimes too, I think about like people talk about the 80s in music being so creative, and which I totally agree with. But I don't think it was dissimilar with what you see out of these jumps training books. And there's
I think the 60s were more creative than the 80s in music, but we could have that discussion offline.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure.
And that, but anyway, go on.
Yeah, I was going to say, maybe relative to the I don't know, the one after the OOs, whatever the tens or whatever, the 2010s relative, where they're just rehashing old songs and various things. But the interesting thing with that, and something that's beautiful about those books too, is a lot of the figures are like hand drawn. Where it's like there's something to putting a pen to paper or not just being creative with the exercises. And I don't think they were creative, and I'm sure you'd agree with this. I mean, I'm sure there was some, but I feel like the creativity was very practical, and it's almost as if the hand-drawn element of that keeps it very human versus
the Triple Jump Encyclopedia, there's those fold-out things, and I know Larry Booth quite well. It cost them a boatload of money to get those sequence pictures. And the place where we got sequence pictures was from Liked Athletic, a German publication. And it came out every 2 weeks, and those were golden, but everything was hand drawn. And one of the key influence for me in the sprints was Betty Atwater. And I have her original study where she did 2 summers where she took the top 8 sprinters in the US, and she hand digitized every step of 100 meters. A step is left foot, then right foot, and then left foot. That's a stride. And I've gotten back in touch with her. I really think the process that we had to go through to study the event, because it was so laborious, that it really helped us understand better the essence of what was happening. It's so easy now, in a sense. I have a BAAB, British Amateur Athletic Board, reports from the 68, 72, 76, 80, 84. And they stopped doing it after 88, Olympic reports. And up until 88, the illustrations were hand drawn. I mean, it's awesome. You're right. And and the books, I mean, Triple Jump, Track Technique, which I had the honor of editing for 10 years. I mean, I recommend that everybody get up to the 100th issue if you can get them. I just gave mine away. It's but because the stuff is golden. It's just golden, and a lot of things haven't changed. So.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's
I got
okay.
on another rant.
I'm sure there's, I mean, with all your experience, I'm sure there's like little, I almost look at it like, if you go down this road, there's a lot in that, every road, there's a lot of history there.
Yeah,
I get it.
yeah,
For
yeah,
sure.
yeah, yeah.
It's interesting doing a podcast when these could be like an afternoon conversation on pretty much any topic. So,
Yeah, I love those afternoon conversations, but particularly with coaches. You're kind of in that middle generation, and then the 20 somethings coaches now are just, I feel really bad sometimes, in a lot of sport, because they're kind of lost. They have no historical context. I talked to the gold medal winner, from the French pole vaulter. I talked to his coach in 2012, and I asked him if I said something about Dutch Warmerdam. He didn't know who Dutch Warmerdam was. And I'm going, I walked away, like kind of shaking my head. Dutch Warmerdam was the first guy to vault 15 feet.
mhm.
He's probably the greatest vaulter of all time. If there wouldn't have been World War II, he would have had 2 Olympic gold medals. And he was a pioneer in the event, and you got to know that. You got to know where things came from. Well, some of the swing techniques that he used on a bamboo pole, and then later, I'm not even sure that he was coach at Fresno State, used a steel pole. And I competed in decathlon with him, and he did the Masters event. And at age 62, he cleared 12 feet, So, yeah, there's a lot of things like that. And I don't think those who ignore history are condemned to repeat it. Some people attribute that to Toynbee, but I think, there's a lot of, in distance running now, this double thing with the Finns and that. I mean, the Norwegians. But if you go back to Lasse Viren's training and the Finnish training and that, it was the same training, from 66 to 76, but they just didn't define it as such. So.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I do think, we had mentioned something like this before we push record, but I do think it'd be really cool to get you or Dan John or like to have hey, here's these 10 books written before 1985 or something. If you're a coach in athletics, you should read these 10 books before, just because to know where you've been from. I just bought actually recently, I don't know when this book was written, but it was Arthur Lydiard's running book, and just to just because, and I don't really train distance. I do train distance running. I train running for people who want to run better for 5Ks, but I don't train like the cross country team. But even still, like there's so much that you can take from that. It's almost like getting in just the way of thinking and Perry, I forget how to say the Circutti, I think is his last name. Like in Dan
Cerruti. You got to know.
That's terrible.
You got to understand Percy Cerruti.
Yeah.
Percy Cerruti and those guys, because I mean he was into weight training.
Yeah,
he was into sand hills and that kind of stuff. He was an eccentric bugger, but it worked for the athletes that believed in him, and it worked for Herb Elliott. Herb Elliott was. Everybody criticized, I mean, who knows what he would have run had he kept running. He retired at 23.
Yeah.
He never ran on a synthetic track, but Percy Cerruti, Elliott's, Lydiard's book was every year. That was a must read in August before cross country started for me.
Yeah.
It was just a must read because it grounded you in certain things. And it's usually misinterpreted, by the way, too.
I'm sure.
This labeled as marathon training. And, if you read the whole book and you digest it, you'll realize that there's a lot more there.
Yeah. I was going to say a couple of things with the art and the hand drawing. And then I also had something with the history that I thought was interesting that you said was, back at Cal, that was actually the first or the only time I've met you in person. That was probably like 7 years ago or 8 years ago, maybe more than that now. Time flies. But I know you were there. I think you were having a conversation with Nick Folker, and it was Dave Durden, who was the head swim coach there. I remember watching him write workouts or just having a conversation with him once. And Dave was an engineer, and he had this graph paper, like engineering graph paper, and he would always write the workouts on. It had all the little grids, like little grids and squares, almost like Excel on it. And he would always write the workouts out with his hand write them. And he said, he's like, yeah, if I write it on a computer, they usually end up being too hard or too difficult. and so at the time, I thought that was just interesting. But the further I get along, I guess, especially with the rise of AI, and I'm not totally. I do think like with technology, like just having smartphones and slow motion video has been so good for me, so good. And so I can't that's awesome. But there's also something at the same time. It's like just balancing all the things that are. On one end, you do have all this data points and video and high speed, and it's really cool. But then on the other end, it's like you have to at least take time to do something that is more human, that's more art. Like Paul Cater, who's been on the podcast, talks about, like, he's done. I've seen videos of him where he'll work on a painting, and he's a very good painter, and also one of the most creative coaches I know. And then he'll do deadlifts, and he'll go back and work on his painting and do deadlifts, and that's like his thing on Sunday or something like that. And so I just think that also made me think of that with those 70s and 80s manuals, and along with that too. And I don't want to get too far sectioned in, because I had another question kind of to go along with, or thought, but there was an AI. Speaking of AI, there was an AI powered like study or compilation on the nature of music through the 60s, 70s, 80s, and now. And it was saying that now more music sounds the same than it sounded different. So it was more different, and the richness of the tonality, however they measured that, was better in like the 60s. I think actually, like you said, I think the 60s was like a peak there for a lot of that stuff.
Well, yeah, because that's when all the influences kind of merged, in a lot of ways. Eastern music, country western. I mean, if you look not just at the Beatles, I mean, ironically, I've gotten back into the Bakersfield sound, sort of. I love Merle Haggard, and the first song I heard walking in the locker room at Fresno State as a kid that grew up in Santa Barbara, California, although I did work on a ranch in the summer, was I got the Hungries for Your Love While I'm Waiting in Your Welfare line, and that introduced me to country music. But if you listen to Buck Owens and all these different influence and soul and Southern blues and everything came together. Well, I think that's also something that happened in track, because remember, there was huge segregation up through that. I mean, the black teams in the South didn't compete against white schools until they were NAIA, or a lot, and so it's all these things melt together, society, music, history. You can't separate it. Because you're coaching people, and I just think I had this conversation with Elise Perry, who's an elite cricket player, elite, maybe one of the best ever, last year when I started working with her, and I said, Elise, this is just a big dance. You've had too many influences that have made you mechanical and robot-like. And it's about rhythm and tempo. And I said, I want you to go. She's in Australia, and I want you to, and we'll talk tomorrow. I want you to go look at the Ukrainian high jumper, and I want you to just get a feeling for her rhythm. That's exactly the rhythm you've got to use when you bowl. It's rhythm and tempo and a feel. Not being robotic, not concentrating on what the big toe does and what the knee does and all of that, because you want to express yourself through the movements of the sport. That's the way I look at it. So now there's sometimes, like, and I'm dropping names, but I'm so fortunate right now this is only two athletes I'm working with. I'm coaching coaches now, as Summer McIntosh, who broke 2 world records last year as a 16-year-old. And what some people identify as a fault in her stroke, I'm convinced now is a strength in her stroke. And maybe you could correct that. And there's a terrific quote by Lorna Muley, Femke Bowles coach. He said, strengthening weaknesses without weakening strengths. And to me, a lot of that, and I got to spend some time with him in Padua about 6 weeks ago. And that's what a lot of it is. It's coaching is managing complexity and harnessing chaos. Okay. And I just see too many people trying to fit people into boxes. I see this I watched something yesterday. I actually am watching Instagram now and I'm trying to figure out how to get the video, some of the dumb videos off there. I've gotten it's refreshed my memory on certain things, like, and that, but I just see coaches making people into robots, and I see excessive drilling done wrong, like the mock drills. I was hugely influenced by Gerard Mock and his system. And most people do the drills wrong. They don't use it to put force in the ground. They're not form drills. They're strengthening
Yeah.
drills, and so I
Oh
could go
yeah.
on forever, but
Yeah.
it's
That's
it's it's an eclectic process. And I learned that. I didn't know what eclectic meant when Bill Bowerman said it, so I had to go home that night and look it up. And eclectic is, and that's what he did. I mean, that guy coached a gold medalist in the 400 meters. He coached a 20-meter shot putter. He coached, all
mm,
those great distance runners, and invented, a lot of the Nike shoes. He was a real polymath. And in college, he was a pre-med major, so, those are the things that inspire me, and I'd like to, in the rest of my life, God, I hope I have quite a few more years by my genetics, at least family history. I've got a few more. I'll be 77 in January. I just want to share this information with the younger coaches that need to be exposed to this, instead of some of this crazy stuff that commercially is out there, and my answer is, I was at this in Padua, European Athletics Coaches Association. A guy did a presentation on sprinting, and he spent an hour on a sprint stride that I would have spent 5 minutes on. And it was paralysis by analysis. Then another coach who's coached some European championships, he had a drill for every aspect, so did
hmm
Gerard Mock. But there was only like 3 drills for each, and Gerard did. And I'm thinking, like, where are you going with this? This is a sprint, left, right, left. And my question, Joel, always is, you show me something, and you break down. And my question is, in every sport I work with, is, can you coach that? Can you coach it? Not is it relevant to what you're doing? None of us have ever had unlimited time to train. Even now, working with these two great athletes, Summer trains 28 hours a week, so the dry land part is 4 hours of that. Now Elise is a different story. She's a professional. She's 33 years old. She's got one sport emphasis now. She was a world-class soccer player too, so she can do a little bit more, but it's not necessary to do more. That's what we've changed with their training. Sorry, I'm so hyped up. I get on a roll here.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I understand completely. Something I did want to say that kind of sprung up in my mind. It's funny because as I'm talking about the AI that says the music from the 60s, 70s, and 80s is the most rich and all that. And now it's like, but I think sometimes too, we also forget all the bad songs that were in the 60s, 70s, because there was a lot of bad songs, a lot of bad songs. And I think there was also a lot of bad coaching there too. It's like, we can't just look at the best artistic coaching. I remember Jeff Hauser when he was on saying, in the 1970s or whatever, the thing was, or a thing at least, was, hey, just push the ground away as hard as you can, as long as you can in sprinting. And then it shot the other way, 10 years later. Get your knees up as fast as you can in front and try to cut the backside. It's like these pendulums going back and forth, And but I think we forget about all the poor coaching and poor songs. And then it also leads me to think, well, we were talking about this with those jumps books, the power and the speed and the coordination. Well, how do you improve on those? Like, how do you build on something that was so beautiful and artistic without, holding to the core of that, then being able to incorporate the smartphones and data, whatever we have now, the inner learning through fields? Do you have any, what's your take on how we can improve on that art of that time period?
Well, I think, first of all, we talked about this the other day when we talked about you having me on, is in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and even the early 80s, most of the athletes you worked with in the United States in track and field, and in virtually any sport, had the, and boys and girls had PE K through 12. And they had learned basics of good movement, depending on, certain states had better, there was curriculum, but everybody had to do President's Fitness Test, which had sprinting. Used to have sprinting. It had a softball throw. It had a jump. It had a 6-minute run in it. So you could look at and identify pretty good athletes, but you were exposed to the basics of movement, and that's the key thing. And then dance. I was reflecting the other day. My freshman year at Fresno State, I had an elementary folk and square dance, which was 11 o'clock, and I slept through about half of them. That shows how motivated I was academic. Well, you say academic. but I reflect back on how much I learned in that dance class. Now I understand it better at 77, in terms of rhythm and tempo. But I think you have to coach that. Some of the best coaches I've been around hardly ever say anything, and I find myself doing this. That's all you have to do,
Mm.
And you mentioned smartphones, man, that's been great. But I think you have to be careful that you don't show every jump, every
Yes.
throw, every
Hmm.
sprint in slow motion with the athlete. Okay.
Totally agree.
The biggest mistake I made, my best man was a 199-foot discus thrower back in the day, which was pretty good 50 some years ago. And he introduced me at Super 8 film, and we had a film editor. And you'd look at frame by frame, and I can show you film of me in my first decathlon. I was throwing frame by frame, and so the ability to instantly video analyze is really excellent. But sometimes, I know I did this when Elise came here and spent 2 weeks. I said, I want you to shut your eyes now. I'm playing the video. This is really kind of weird. And I want you to listen to your footfalls. Okay. And then we were doing something in my garage kind of gym where there was a tempo to it. And I said, I want you to look at it, but I want you to focus on the tempo that's allowing you to achieve the
Hmm.
range of motion that you need to achieve in that motion. And I think this is I learned this. I think as I've gotten older, I don't think I understood this very well in the first 10 or 15 years of coaching. I think a guy who did understand this really well was Bud Winter,
Mm.
the relaxed and win philosophy, and everybody he was brutally
Mm.
criticized by the Germans and the Europeans because he wasn't rigid and scientific and that. But I got to watch him coach. I got to watch them run again at the West Coast relays in that, and he's a brilliant coach. He fit the system to the athlete, and it's not black, white, or music or anything. I mean, it's that's what it comes down to is how do you create that flowing motion, whether it's a baseball pitcher, whether it's a high jumper, whatever it is. So and that you don't learn that in school. Now I really, if I were to go back again, and I had a class at Stanford in grad school with dance master student. If I wouldn't have been so hung up, I would have taken a dance class then. Where the opportunity was there, and I would really, a modern dance class. My daughter, who was a really good athlete, really good sprinter, still holds the county record in 200, and she made it to state meet 3 years in a row in track and said, Dad, I'm not going to run my senior, which kind of, but
Hmm.
that's okay. I was her coach and coached at the high school, and she wanted, I love soccer. I'm going to play soccer. And then after 2 years, after playing a year of college soccer, she went back to sprinting, but her speed came back the summer before because she came home and she said, Dad, I'm going to take modern dance, and I'm going to take, I want you to coach me back like you coached me when I was a sprinter instead of a soccer player. And that again it was more dance like.
Yeah.
She had a term that I use now, I've adopted, and Kristen, how do you feel today? I feel really sprinty.
Mm.
Well, that's great. When you feel really sprinty, you're bouncy, you're just really, light on your feet and putting force into the ground. And she'd come out some days and said, Dad, it ain't there, so we knew that was barefoot on the grass and, or something like that. And you do that with every athlete, because you want to be sprinty. If I'm coaching a 10,000 meter runner, I want him to be sprinty.
Yeah. Yeah. I really like what you had said about, and I think a lot of coaches share this sentiment of that over drilling mentality. And it's in some ways, I think of it, I just had this thought the other day where, and if you talk about, well, what is art? Where does training become art and creative? And if we look at things like a robot, like a 2D, like 2 dimensions, like you think about how a Lego man walks, like I'm sure robots, as they get more advanced, they'll be able to use more multiplanar motion, but like the Lego man robot is linear, sagittal plane. It's just we're going in 2 dimensions. And I was thinking about this. I was like, drills and cues at their heart, like an internal cue, like a do this, really is a more two-dimensional thing at its heart. It's hard for athletes to be multiplanar, to do the linear or the sagittal, the transverse, and the frontal in coordinated function and have a cue that can really capture all the coordination that's going on. It's like at that point, you have to go into feelings and analogies. And a cue is almost too simplistic at that point to start to really engage that full 3D machinery. And I think that's kind of, in some ways, maybe you could say that's where it becomes art, because anybody can find the drill and find all the drills or the special exercises and just paste them on. But for it to become art, there needs to be a language that now the body can process the three-dimensionality of those things. Or I think there's constraints too that can do it as well that are a gateway, but it's not, you can't just copy and paste drills and cues because it will only get you to a certain point.
It'll get you mechanic. I think eventually will make you mechanical.
Yes.
Rather than allowing the freedom of movement to be able to happen. I think that's a really good observation. And I want the athlete to develop their own cue system. I've given homework to them sometimes to say, go back, write in your training log, write down what resonated, what made that connection happen. And sometimes on the video, I'm like, yeah, you got it. Okay. But that's fine. I saw that. Did they feel it? And I think that's really an important part of the art of coaching. I've seen that across sports with the great coaches, whether it's pitching coaches, having been able to work with a lot of sports. Same thing with swimming. I mean, there's a definite rhythm and tempo. We had a girl here, Emma Wyatt, who got the silver medal in the 400 IM in Tokyo, last Olympic Games. And one day, it was a Sunday, it was just her and I and the head coach. And her fly, which is the first event in the 400 IM, was going to be the make or break event. And that was related a lot to what I had done, we had done with her in terms of strength. It's a very strength oriented event and big. And she did a 50 fly. And after about 6 strokes, I turned and I wear hearing aids. I said, Brent, she's got it. I said, listen, you can hear turn away and listen to the rhythm. She's got it. And she finished and she had a smile on her face, like nobody said anything. She finally got it. And I identified that there was a rhythm, a tempo that was there and I think the fact that she was by herself instead of a whole bunch of other people in lanes, there's a lot of factors and a culmination of a lot of work too, so.
Today's podcast is sponsored by TeamBuildr. TeamBuildr is an online software for coaches and trainers, and I've continued to hear great things about the TeamBuildr platform. If you're looking for either an in-house training portal for your training groups or an online training hub, be sure to check out the TeamBuildr training software. Yeah, in terms of, I had a couple of questions, and I think the first one, in follow-up of this, or to kind of continue on with this, because I do want to get into, I don't want to not ask you about like the process of developing creativity and coaching in a way that's also make sure it's practical and hopefully in a way that can also take advantage of some of the technology we have now without creating the mess of data. I do want to ask you, I'll start with this, is you mentioned you started, like you were lifting, I mean, you said 1963, that was before it was cool, basically, and it helped you. And how did you, a lot of people would know you for functional training. And so what was the path that took you from, and obviously the lifting helped you at first, like what was the point, those points where you were like, okay, now it's too much, or now here's where it hit its ceiling, and here's the functional path that lies ahead. What were some milestones that really led to that distinction?
When I started questioning was in Santa Barbara, where I trained, UCSB, and coached the high school there. Bayer Leverkusen track club from Germany would come, and they had some great Olympians there with them. And I watched them, and then there was a bunch of Europeans that would come, and they'd come in the weight room, and they'd do 3 exercises, and then they would go out and jump, and they would throw overhead shot and do that. And we're in there for an hour and a half, grunting and groaning, and and they all could. I'm talking about combined eventers now. They could all throw better than us, and they're and so that led me to really start to think like, what the hell's going on here? And I still made the same mistake. Um, I coached two guys that scored 79, 88, 79, 92. Steve Odgers, who went on to work with me with the White Sox, but we spent way too much time in the weight room. It was only really in the mid 1980s where it started to come together. Like, wait a minute, we're not getting the return here. So doing some of that is still important, right? The max strength, some of the traditional stuff is fine. If it's, and that's dictated by your body type relative to the sport you're playing. But no, and then you start looking at people, and, started looking at vaulters. Vaulters didn't lift that much, but they did more gymnastics, And then you get exposed to other sports. There's a guy named Salnikov who was the world record holder in the 1500 meters. I have the VHS tape here. I'm going to get it.
Swimming, right?
Swimming.
Yeah, because it's not track. I've seen those. Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to make that distinction.
It's all fuzzy and stuff.
Yeah.
But it was all like almost, it was what I pour the term functional training too, because everything's functional. It's just how relative. But it was all almost like calisthenics. It's what we do now.
Yes.
What I do with the swimmers now. Not necessarily lighter weights. I mean, some are relative to her body weight is strong as a bull, in terms of what she uses with dumbbells and that. So it was a process. It was a process over time. Like, and with myself as an athlete, I found that as an athlete playing football in college, the heavier I got, the heavier I lifted, it compromised my speed. Okay. And then I found that sweet spot, where, I mean, I could squat 450 pounds and, for reps and all that kind of stuff. But, and even when I started in decathlon, I mean, I spent way too much time lifting. And then as I wasn't very good, but as I got better, the time, because I didn't have time to lift very much. So I would do pull-ups at school. I would do rope climb. I did more bounding. I got a hold of Vera Koshansky's first studies about short jumps and long jumps, and I did more of that. And so that's what I incorporated. I incorporated it with the kids that I was coaching, and then at Cal, and and then as we diversified into other sports. Yeah. So, but it's you get a bump, and particularly and female, I mean, and strength training for females is hugely important, but it's a type of strength training. But we did it. I mean, I had a mile relay team then that was fifth in the California state meet, and every one of those kids could squat 225. Those girls, and the leadoff runner was a distance runner. Wow. Now, would I do that now? I got together with one of them. She came to see me in Holland. She lives and married a Dutch guy. I hadn't seen her in 40 years, and she was there when I gave a talk, and I used her as an example. I said, now, some of the things I did with Molly, she was a very good jumper too, which was key, despite some of the stupid stuff I did, so, but yeah, so it was a process. And so it's finding, Joel, how the pieces fit, where they fit. The umbrella term is strength training and power training, and it's developing strength that you can use, not that you can measure. And that goes contrary to, to a lot of strength and conditioning programs where the whole, you're at Cal and you've got to report to the head coach that the team got stronger, I don't, yeah, but can they swim faster? Can they run faster? So I don't know. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. I was in a very similar boat in so many ways. I think track or swimming or just like outcome individual sports that are just pure outcome based are a very easy way to find that. I think it's just because as soon as you become imbalanced, your time shows it. But in a team sport like soccer or football or basketball, you might not have really noticed that. Like maybe you were a little bit off because you spent too much time doing something you didn't need to, but as long as you can put the ball in the basket and make the play, does anyone really, I mean, but then it might be like more injury susceptibility, things like that, longevity. And then, of course, everyone wants to be in peak shape. I mean, you, of course, would want to be that way. But I think all I'm trying to say is I think it's easiest to at least early on find that in some of those sports like track and field, at least in my experience.
There was a lady, Dr. Lois Klatt at Concordia University in River Forest, Illinois. I met her when I was working with for 2 years, I worked with the White Sox and the Bulls. And she had a big influence on me, in terms now called functional training, incorporating balance, proprioception, a lot of things like that. And I did it with several of the individual players with the Bulls in the off season, and you could see the difference. And you look at a lot of the athletes that are training today. Some of it's a little over the top and a little bit weird, but it makes a lot more sense. Now we've danced around one word that you haven't mentioned, in specificity. I think you have to be careful that you get so wrapped up in specificity that you're just trying to imitate the sport and adding stress to stress. The point that I want to make is I want to use the physical preparation piece to prepare you so that you can get more out of your practice.
Yes.
You get more out of your practice, you're going to be better at your event. In your case, you were a high jumper. So if you could do 12 more jumps a week this year than you did last year at really good quality because your physical preparation had been better, that gives you, or more longer approach jumps or something like that gives you the opportunity to be a lot better, And I think what we do, it's a 3-step process. It's the physical prep, strength training being part of it, actual sport practice, and then competition. And it goes in that order, because it's easy to get wrapped up in, it isn't just numbers in the weight room. It can be throws, it can be, bounds, it can be all kinds of stuff, Yeah.
Yeah. I think having more ways to express a number, especially in athletic preparation, like jump heights, plyometric outputs, throws outputs, it gives you more than just, oh, I lifted this weight. And then, you quickly start to realize too, I think I like those stories too, where it's like, hey, they only did 3 lifts. Or remember Dan John had a coach, he said he was about like, you do your event, you have like a max isometric and then a magic drill or something like that. Like three things. Yeah. And to start with less but it also makes me think too, like I also the reference of when I was in high school and just kind of figuring out my own stuff and trying to, pull from the back of magazines, jump manuals. My dad bought me like the USATF conference one year. Like my Christmas gift as a senior in high school is the USATF VHS tapes, like winter conference or I don't know, something like that. So I'm watching high jump and like, it's like Troy Kemp's doing like these step ups and I'm like, I'm going to do those now. So like, literally the one thing I'm doing, the only exercise a few times a week is a couple sets of 10, step ups on a cinder block in my basement. But like my strength, but then I'm playing basketball. My strength to body weight's awesome. I'm jumping high, dunking, like
there you go.
Nothing gets fallen off that much. Like it's like, and that literally took me like 10 minutes. I might have done a couple sets of bench press, and then, 10 years later, you're spending 70 minutes in the gym. And it's like, wait, I don't feel as bouncy anymore. I don't, I thought I was, it's almost like the thing too. It's interesting to have that wisdom where the thing that does help you at first, like you mentioned, when you got stronger, it helps at first. You're gaining muscle and compression and the coordination, everything goes with that.
Especially at the age, the biological age that I started, too. And that's when you apply certain stimuli too, Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you.
It's all good. I was going to ask you with all that in mind, full circle, like how would you, the programming I've seen from you certainly is more like not barbell powerlifting oriented at all, but I'm curious how far you would, like where would the furthest you would go with that stuff is, or where do you see the role of the powerlift derivatives, typical 1 rep max strength or those big strength movements, like where do those land in your programming now?
Yeah. If you're a thrower, you have to do some of that. If you have to overcome an external load or you have to move somebody, you have to incorporate that. There's, and you have to armor yourself for football and for some of those. But I think the thing is, and Nick Garcia and I have had this conversation a lot, and he does a wonderful job. I mean, I would look at his programs.
Hmm.
I think had a little bit of an influence, but he's gone so far beyond me. And what the mistake that has always that's continued to be made is they spend too much time, even in football, in max strength
Hmm.
and that. So you get in it, you get out of it, you come back to it. And our programs are, I mean, well, I've got contrast. I've got a world record holder who's coaching a world record holder who's 17, and a veteran athlete who's had all these loads imposed upon her, which almost ended her career. And so her longest her longest strength training workout now is 40 minutes, and she'll do a 20-minute priming session the days of matches. Summer, the longest workout she does, dryland wise, is about now, well, we call it special core. It's about 50 minutes, her and I one on one. But none of it's about heavy. It's more about connection and coordination. Remember, strength training is coordination training with appropriate resistance. The key word is that everybody thinks now is thinking about coordination training, but appropriate resistance is relative to the athlete. Now, if I were at Cal with some of the swimmers that you guys, the sprinters that you guys had, that Nick Boker had, there's no question that uh, there would be small blocks of max strength with those guys and women too. Let's not forget that that's not. So I don't know if I'm answering the question. It's a moving target, and I don't want to leave people with the impression that you don't lift heavy. I'm very, very conscious though about loading the spine,
Hmm.
particularly with developing athletes that, I don't think you have to. And I also, the obsession with power clean and some of the Olympic lift derivatives, people spend 6 months learning how to power clean properly when just do a frickin' high pull, and start with dumbbell high pulls. That's what Nick does, dumbbell snatches, and you're going to lead into that work. But you're doing an athlete a disservice, uh, if you're not if you're spending all your time trying to teach them technical lifts that are necessary to be a weightlifter. But now you're a football player, you're a sprint swimmer, you're a high jumper. So you can adapt the movements, and remember, the highest power output comes from jumping and throwing. If you just look at power output, so combining uh, um, movements, so we'll do like Elise, who's training like a javelin thrower in a lot of respects, we'll do fairly heavy high pull, and then do an over three reps, and then an over the back throw, followed by 3 repeat standing long jumps. Okay, she'll do that, 5 sets of those, 3 sets of those, depending, on to something else. So again, the goal is to finish the workout not feeling depleted and hammered, but to feel, my daughter said, sprinty, you
Hmm.
know. So it's easy to beat the shit out of yourself with training too. Leave something in the tank. That's the biggest lesson that I learned. Probably it took me, I don't know, I had different kids teach it to me,
Hmm.
different athletes, in pro sports and that. Got to leave something in the tank, Vern. My nickname used to be One More Vern. Oh, come on, we'll just do one more. That's when you kill them. So I've abandoned that nickname. So it's
Yeah.
one less Vern now. So
Yeah. I think just for the sake of like longevity through the years too, like if you had two athletes each training for 5 or 7 years, and one coach was always like had them do 10% extra, and 1% had them, one other coach had them doing 10% less, saving a set every time. And
yeah, yeah.
who's going to be better who's going to have more gas in the tank and at the end of that 5 or 7 years, just from a long-term perspective as well.
Well, Joel, it's in athletics too, track and field. You're rewarded for longer careers today, actually
Hmm.
financially rewarded. And a pro athlete, the longer they can go, the more money they make. I mean, Elise is at the top of her earning curve right now. We had a Hall of Fame player with the White Sox, Carlton Fisk, we changed all his training, to this type of training, away from heavy lifting. And he was still catching at 46. And that was when he was age 40. So it gave him probably 4 to 5 more years in his career when he made the greatest amount of money. So we have to think, and one of the points I had a little agenda here. I wanted to make sure that everybody understood that training is cumulative from session to session, day to day, week to week, month to month, and year to year. So we build upon the previous year. So you don't have to go each year. An analogy I use is, okay, I've got a house. I've got a nice one-level house. I want to add a second floor to part of the house. What do? I don't tear the house down and start over. I strengthen the foundation. Okay. And that's the mistake that I see people still making. I'm seeing it all over right now. I call it the Olympic year syndrome. Everybody's gone to South Africa. All the Euros are gone to South Africa, and they're doing more than they've ever done. This is the year to do less than you've done. Okay. You're going to take advantage of it's a weird cycle, but at least previous 2 years. And so you strengthen the foundation. And so I never use base training anymore. I think that's a very misleading term. It's foundation training. And that's clearly defined in my system, and with the people that I work with, so we're always going to keep strengthening the foundation. Each year it might be a little different emphasis, than the previous year based upon results and what you've done in the previous year.
Today's podcast is sponsored by the Plyomat. The Plyomat is a jump testing device that allows you to instantly receive ground contact times, jump heights, reactive strength measurements, and more in your training populations. It's easy to use, accurate, and affordable. And an awesome feature that I love about the Plyomat is it easily allows the connection of not just one mat, but you can string multiple mats together for use in things like multi-hurdle hops and bounding situations. I absolutely love the Plyomat, recommend it. And to check it out, you can head to plyomat.net. That's plyomat.net. Yeah. I wanted to ask you a little bit, along with the foundation, a little bit more about the physical education piece. I did want to mention too with the Olympic lifting. I think I kind of learned that the hard way in my own career. Early on, Olympic lifting was really good. Like I self-taught in high school. I was like, oh, cleans look cool.
So did I. Yeah.
And
nobody taught me.
Honestly, one of the first, it's funny how I remember this. One of the first two-hand dunks I had off one leg was my sophomore year. And it was the day after I did like cleans in my basement from the floor with 155 or something. And I was like, I probably weighed like 160. And I was like, oh, this feels really good. And then I remember like hang cleans never gave me quite the same thing. And it was just kind of this weird thing. But then long story short is I kind of went through these periods where after that initial bit, I kind of went through these periods where like my sophomore year of college, I read about the Olympic lifters that Vardanian could high jump 7 feet off 3 steps. He was a master of sport in long jump and all this, along with clean and jerking 500.
There's some KGB misinformation too. You never high jump 7 feet and and that. But anyway.
I read it anyways. I forget what manual it was. It was like these spiral bound,
Alvermeal and all these guys, Olympic lifting guys, want to they create these myths and listen to it's just a bunch of shit. Go on. So.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I imagine he at least probably did them. It was probably
they could jump
better than average.
I mean, if you ever watch, they can jump. They could jump.
Yeah. Yeah. 7 feet is pretty good though. I could see, I mean, again, I wasn't there. I could see like maybe 6'4", 190 or something, 195.
Especially looking at how short he was.
Yeah. Anyways, so I could definitely see an exaggeration. The point I guess I was trying to make was, I was so hung up on that. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to get my clean so high. And it was actually a time where I was a sports medicine athletic training major, which I changed my junior year, but I wasn't sprinting as much. I wasn't doing as the other skills as much and really focusing on Olympic lifts. And my first meet, I jumped and my best running jump off one leg was like almost as good with a 2-step approach than it was off 10. And then my jump, my first jump of the year, I jumped like 6'1". It was just horrendous. And then the next year, I remember it was funny. Our coach gave us like 3 sets of 10 for cleans in the fall, which is like, you'd think it's ridiculous, right? And on paper it is. And this does kind of frame my mind that sometimes ridiculous things, like you said, in spite of whatever, but I remember I just kind of slogged through it, and we did it, but I had a really good elsewise really good training in the fall. Like, had great training partners. My coach was a very physical education type person, phys ed teacher. So just a lot of good human movement, sprinting, and all that stuff, and throws, explosive throws, like backwards overhead. My shot backwards overhead increased like 6 feet. But I remember we did our max testing for the fall, and I cleaned 245 at about 175, 180 the year before. And when I jumped 6'1", and then I got better. I jumped like 6'9" that sophomore year. Next year, clean 200 when we tested it, barely. It felt so uncoordinated, just from like the 3x10, which kind of treated the Olympic more like a general than being specific unto Olympic lifts, so my max went down. And then I went and jumped 7 feet that year and jumped over 6'10" multiple times. And so that was always a frame for me. But then when I did utilize the Olympic lifts. Like I included them in programs, saw people get better at them early in college coaching and not get better at their events, or they did, but like it just I've kind of slowly like bounced up and down and zeroing in. And where I kind of land now is I almost always, not always, but I usually either do like boost Saxator 4x5 with like a lower weight, kind of like a home base, or I pair them with, like you said, something rhythmic or something explosive, pair it with a med ball throw, pair it with light bounding that's tempo and rhythm based, and just keep it kind of lighter in general. And that's kind of where I've landed. It's like bouncing back and forth.
One of the things I want to say is in my system, I probably do more Olympic lifting movements than these guys that espouse Olympic lifting. If I send you programs, and sell them. Well, there's a phase where we do some, what's called GA stuff. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. We'll never go above 6 reps, but and we'll do a lot of complexes with a pull, a push, a squat, and a row, and stuff like that. And you'll be up to 7,500 pounds in no time, and you can see the change in their bodies, when they go through this. It's the phases are the longest phase we do is a 6-week phase, but it's 2-3 weekers, things like that. So there's a lot of pulling, a lot of dumbbell snatches, a lot of dumbbell high pulls, not so much dumbbell cleans, a lot of, and the dumbbell allows you to do the rotational aspect and do more. And I'm really good friends, and Jimmy Ratcliffe and I talk all the time. And we talked about when we started, and there's another interesting thing that I'd like the listeners to hear is, back when we started lifting, and I'm a little older, I'm 10 years older than him, but when there was 3 lifts in the Olympic lifts. The press was in there, but it was always a split snatch, a split clean into a jerk. And somehow we got away from that. And I'm doing a lot more split squatting, front foot and rear foot elevated, and split snatching, even with a dumbbell, and split pulls than we ever did before. Because again, it's reciprocal, and I look at that, and again, if Elise was a javelin thrower, she'd really be pretty damn good, and that's one of the biggest changes we made, was going to split work as opposed to, off 2 legs too. So
yeah, that year. I love that. Yeah, that year I did jump 7 feet. So with the 3x10 cleans year, again, it's just so funny. Like, it's such an interesting workout. But after 3x10 cleans, we did 2x8 split hang snatch. And there you go. But it's funny because I think that was a really, really helpful piece. And with 2x8, it's like people are like, oh, you can't be explosive. It's like, it's general. It's not like, if you want to be explosive, go do a single effort overhead backwards shot put throw, or something like that. Like that can give you. And that was one thing too, I realized once I started coaching at Wilmington College and all the test outs, was I saw people who were better athletes who would throw the 16-pound shot or 8-pound shot overhead farther, and their cleans were okay, but not like amazing necessarily. And I started to realize that the correlations actually were the throws were the number one correlator. And then 2 was like the Olympic lifts. Not that they couldn't be good. I always just kind of weigh the Olympic lifts against a good like backward shot put, or even like a good depth jump to a med ball, overhead type thing, like something like that.
Well, in my looking at, and again, looking at a lot of information here as we're getting ready to move and going through that. I don't know about correlation. I'm not a stat guy, and correlation implies causation. But I always was interested, and this is where going back to the president's fitness test when they had standing long jump. Standing long jump tells me a lot. Can you coordinate? Can you project horizontally and over the back throw? And you look at all the European literature going back, forget drugs and all of that. There's always a standing long jump, not a vertical jump. Okay, because it's horizontal projection. And then an over the back and or a forward through the legs, and looking at the difference. And I saw that in baseball because we did that in training. The guys who could jack a ball, the guys who could throw farther got better. It's about coordination, too. Yeah. Because you've got to get that sequential firing, that you need to transfer. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad, Vern, I'm glad you brought Salnikov up. I will put that in the show notes. So whoever's listening, go to the show notes on Just Fly Sports. I will find the Salnikov video because it's like,
oh, cool.
Even like the sissies. I know that the swimmers at Cal showed me it. They're like, hey, check this guy out. And I'm watching it.
They had it. Yeah. See, Nort, you were really, you, I'm sure you got to know Nort.
Oh, yeah.
Nort was a mentor to me. A wonderful. I mean, I miss his phone calls. I mean, there was one a month or sometimes every week he would call, usually it was mid-afternoon here, his lunchtime. And I just learned so much from him because first of all, he was really curious. And secondly, he was always looking for better ways, and looking outside the sport of swimming, which was a real inspiration, and not afraid to share his mistakes too, which again, I tell what I tell a lot of coaches. If there's a lot of gurus out there now. I heard somebody talk yesterday. Geez, I have 8 years of experience. Oh, really? I'm really impressed. Tell me how many mistakes you've made, how many failures you've made. Yeah, you're coaching in pro football. How many did you break before you got that guy? And to me, that's the acid test that I want to know. Let's talk about, we could do another podcast about failures, the things that I broke people, where we did too much, lost a national championship at Cal because the race wasn't on Monday, it was on Saturday. But it's Monday, we would have beat anybody in the country, but they don't give medals for the last practice before nationals, So, you gotta, you learn, you keep trying to get better. You like I said, it's about curiosity. It's about deep investment in a process, creating a system, your own system, and the core of that system, once you coach a few years, never really changes. But on the outside, you're constantly fine tuning, and that.
Yeah. I was the last question or two here, I think I'd like to kind of dig into the art that goes with that system. And you had mentioned like Rick Rubin and even like the Salnikov thing, that's why I was thinking about that Salnikov. And like, there was one I believe I remember, it's kind of like almost like a sissy squat, but he like went all the way backwards. I saw like a breakdance move like that. I was like, this guy is insane. Like I remember, I think the distance swimmers there, I was like, hey, can you do this? And they're like, I'll break if I do this. Yeah. But you watch that and you're like, it reminded me a little bit about, this guy isn't involved in organized like pro sports, but Kadur Ziani is like he's like in Slam Nation, like he's like a dunker, a guy from like Algeria, France, who I think he high jumped 7'1". I think he just walked out and high jumped 7'1", but 5'11", could do all these, really, really amazing dunks, and a longevity guy. Like he is still dunking into his late 40s, and like if you watch his training videos, it remind me a lot of Salnikov with like a lot of really like kind of like a mobility emphasis, but like a creative mobility emphasis is what I'll call it. And I think there's maybe a certain mentality or mind that goes with that. But I also don't think every athlete's meant to be like that. There's it's a unique place to be for sure.
Yeah, I mean that's again, Joel. We have to be careful. We don't put people in boxes. I just had a conversation with a coach that I worked with a lot about his swimmer who's really up and coming, going to make the Olympic team. And we were talking about, well, she's really tight a lot. What should we do? And I said, I'm going to think about it a little bit more. I've seen her. I've seen her. I don't want to say who it is, but when they come down here and train, and he says, well, we're going to do yoga. And I had the girl that got the silver medal, Wyatt. We did some yoga. We did it ourselves rather than having. And I said, but there's only so many hours in a day, right?
Yeah.
And and you look at some of these people, and they're they're hypermobile and they can do all this stuff.
They're already there. Yeah.
Yeah, they're already there. And some people, and is this like Summer gets really tight in her lats and her traps, Well, it takes some manual. It's swim technique. It's what we're doing in terms of strength training. I mean, we're working and we've had to eliminate a couple of exercises that just aren't right for her. But the key thing is some manual therapy timed correctly, once or twice a week, and so yeah, you got to be careful. I mean, I love looking at that stuff. It's there's some stuff with the who was the Swedish high jumper, the
Stefan Holm,
Stefan Holm. I mean, you look at that and I go, this is really impressive. How many people tried to do that, and
he was creative, kind of like that too, like those guys, like his special drills and the rhythm, kind of similar. Maybe not the flexibility type, but the way creativeness.
Yeah. The famous Werner Gunther tape. I mean, I spent a wonderful Martin Bingesser and I had lunch with his coach last year when I was. I mean, it was we had a contest. We started naming the sports Jean-Pierre Egger, and who's worked with more sports. And he got me by 2. I'd never worked with sailing and something else.
Oh, wow.
Sailing and wrestling.
He worked with sailing. He got all those ideas from sailing. Oh, I'll train the sailing team. And
Egger, I mean, if you look at that tape, that guy was 6'7", 280 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
You look at that tape and watch him, but, you got to understand everything that goes behind that. And, it's pretty neat to watch. But there's some of the guys now that are throwing almost 2 meters farther, maybe can't do that. I don't know. I'm not. I don't think Kovacs is as mobile an athlete as Krauser, but I don't know.
Yeah,
I mean, Nick has been around him a lot, and he says that.
Yeah, so. It's so interesting too. Not to rabbit trail at all, and I trying to close out or. Not to rabbit trail too long here, but I was just watching, and this is more from a rib cage perspective. Like I'm really interested in like the rib cage and like basically if you're a really strong athlete, like Kovacs squats 800 for reps, like legitimately. Crazy. And you think about, I like likening it to like segmental rolling. Like if you're just lying on the ground and you're rolling, but you're trying to like twist your body like a towel while doing it. Like Krauser twists like a towel way more. Kovacs moves kind of like a refrigerator with a cannon. Like it's like that's probably the best description. But still number 2 throw all time. I mean, so that was his superpower. That's the key thing. Well,
there's so many roads to Rome, right? Yeah. There's so many roads to Rome. But this is the mistake. This is what I said. This is the mistake. As a young, I wanted to have everybody, and even though I was heavily influenced by Tom Tellez, Tom had a model for each event.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that really, and then it really helped. I mean, we finished second at nationals my last year at Cal. It was because of the things I learned that January from Tom. But then as I've grown, I'm going, wait a minute, I gotta adapt more. I gotta adapt more to that person's anatomy, to their personality.
Personality is a big one. Yeah.
Yeah, all of those kinds of things. Yeah, it's really important. I was
just gonna say, sorry to cut you off here. I was just gonna say with like Salkinov, or you can really tell with the Ziani video, and I'll put both of them in the show notes. But you could tell that guy's personality kind of fits with like they're out there like in their way that makes them unique, And if you gave like that exact prescription, I even think with some of the stretchy mobility stuff, I think there's some people that I just think are more wired even mentally to like be receptive to that kind of thing. Like we argue about it from an only physiological perspective, And sure, there's a lot of, I think, valid things with that, but I also think there's something mental about it too, in my opinion, but I don't know exactly how to put it. It's just,
I don't know. Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, look, I'd have to walk a little bit or something, but I'll be 77 in
yeah,
January. I could drop down and do the splits right now.
yeah.
Flexibility has never been an issue with me. And some of the most, I had a girl at Cal who was a 10,000 meter runner. She's the 10th best ever. And she ran 33:56 or something. She was always hurt, and she could do full on
Yeah.
front splits in that. And, so it makes, that's the curious part of this. It makes you wonder, and we know that flexibility has, it's mobility with stability
Yeah.
is what you need, but again, understanding that and but that's where the marriage of strength training and one rule that I have is we never sacrifice range of motion for resistance, because I learned that myself. That's how going back to high school, like with you, they were saying, well, you're going to get really tight. And I all of a sudden I'm putting my hands flat on the ground, and everything. It was contrary to what they had told me, the experts, or not the experts,
Yeah.
my coaches that were, they were, I had a great high school basketball coach, but first time I missed a shot, missed an air ball, and he goes, wait, in summer league, it was the first time we had summer league. I go, it's not the weight training, coach. It's I worked 8 hours before the game.
Yeah. I guess with that mobility, yeah, like a Salchow too. I keep mentioning it, but it's like people watch the video. It's like one of the most amazing training videos. But like that guy had control of all his range. Like it's like this, literally a fish who could do these back bends, like knees forward back bends with ultimate and precise control. And that's just something that we don't think about. It's like you see it. It's like, wow, this is a new world. Like, and so such good stuff. All right. So last question here, though, just in light of all that and in light of what you're learning about creativity and, coming out of the 80s. And yeah, I just think, too, like that creativity, the Werner Gunther video and Pierre Eger is so good to watch and see. But advice for developing creativity in a way that is also like practical, like not just to like, I think it's easy to do it and just, hey, people will like this on social media. This is cool. You know what I'm saying? Like your take on practical and helpful creativity in the art form of coaching.
Yeah, well, creativity, first of all, is not getting weird. It's being able to look at the same motion with different eyes. Sometimes it's as simple as like when I spent 5 days with Tom Tellez in Houston in 1982. We said, where do you watch the shot and disc from? And I said, well, of course, like the right side, right, a right-handed thrower. And he says, no, watch from behind. Go up in the stands and watch from above. You'll see things that you haven't seen before. And to me, that's part of the creative process. But curiosity, I keep coming back to this. Curiosity is the foundation of creativity and innovation. Okay, so you have to have curious eyes, to be able to do that. And and I think you mentioned this too. I think some of it is playing with the sport that you're doing yourself, even though you're maybe not proficient with it, and you're gonna try different things, and don't be afraid to try different things. That's part of what the creative process is. And it's if I've been influenced a lot by IDEO, the design company, key step in, I've got it up here on my wall. The key step in design thinking is iteration. So start with a basic technical model and refine the technical model and make sure the technical model fits the athlete that you're working with, not fitting the athlete to the technical model.
Yes.
And that takes a curious and a creative eye to be able to do that, but you've got to really understand the technical model first, I mean, you have to start there, so that would be the advice that I would give.
Yeah.
And if you're coaching athletics, if you're coaching track and field, that's the greatest sport there is. I'm sorry, I've worked with a lot of sports, but it's a great sport because it's a foundation for all other movements in sport. So
yeah, I kind of feel like almost, even as you were talking early on in this podcast, I was like, what if there was like a, not even a pentathlon, like a triathlon of track that just got people, anybody and, who works with athletes could do it. Like, let's do the 100-meter dash, let's do long jump and throw the shot put or something, something like
Run,
that.
jump, and throw. Yeah,
Yeah.
the Brits did that. It was called the 5-star scheme. I guess they scored it. And so if you were under 9, it was a triathlon. If you were 9 to 12, it was whatever, 4 events, and then it went, and eventually they went to 10 events, and they scored it. And if I were principal of a school or athletic director, well, Nick Garcia just told me they're doing it. They're running in quote combines, for the 7th and 8th grade kids that are potentially applying to Notre Dame High School. Yeah, and to get people, some company needs to do something like that and put it in a mall. Have a 30-yard or 40-yard dash, over the back med ball throw, and something like that, and hype it up.
Yeah.
I consulted with Trinidad, their Ministry of Sport, and I said, this is what you need to do. This is what the Brits used to do, and their system is very British still now. I said to go to all the elementary schools, and I said, here's the scoring table, and have the PE teachers do this, and don't try to pigeonhole them in track. Everybody goes to track, which is great, they're or track or soccer. But yeah, it'd be cool. And because who was the fastest kid in your class in 5th grade? You know who it was.
I remember.
I know. Yeah, right. And who's who was, and then what happened?
Mm-hmm.
He didn't grow, or she didn't grow, or something like that. But it's still, it's there's something about that. Yeah, that's pretty neat. Pretty neat. So it's basic, really, really basic. Right.
Yeah, I love it. Well, Vern, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate your being able to chat with you here on video, finally. Well, I guess we got to chat in person like 10 years ago or whatever, but it was awesome having this conversation with you. And man, I'm inspired to start a 70s and 80s. I have like 3 books or 4 books, but I'm inspired to really build that out to like a solid 20. And that's like a set. So give me some ideas after the show. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, we'll definitely work on that. And I've certainly, yeah, for sure. There's classics, right? I mean, and I quick story the other day, Summer McIntosh, who's 17, and it was an analogy I was going to use. I was working with her on something on falling from the center, and I said, "Do you know what a cyclops is?" She looked at me like, and I mean, my generation, I don't know about you, everybody had to read the Iliad and the Odyssey, and she's a really bright girl. So I explained, I saw that on some, not monster movie, but whatever. I said, the one eye, but like, yeah, you got to learn the classics, and there's classics in all, in athletics that everybody should read. Track and Field Omnibook, 1980 edition. That is the number 1 book.
I do have that.
Maybe
I sell myself short, but there's definitely ones I need to add 100%. I was just gonna say one other thing with the creative piece, because I feel like I didn't have a good follow up, but like the idea of just doing simple better, like you said with Tom, like take the simple thing, but then find all the ways to do that better, to observe it, to be aware of it, to like I think maybe that just fits with the drill mindset. We just do the one thing, do it this one way, and now do the next one, do it this one way, and like instead of taking the time to find the thing and then find the awareness of the main thing. So. Maybe that
summarized
to put it
really well. That's good. I'm going to write that down as soon as we get off. So.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, that was on the shirts of the Cal swim team once, like 2014. I always remember that. So,
simple better.
Yes, yeah, doing simple better. That stuck with me, man.
Yeah, that's a great one. I'm sending that off to a couple of athletes as soon as we get off.
yeah, I love it. Well, it's well, hey, again. Thank you so much, Vern. Appreciate the time. And thanks for being on the show.
No, I appreciate it. It's really fun. Love these conversations. Thank you, and have a wonderful holidays.
That finishes another podcast. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next week.